Today's daf is daf lamed. We'll start with Taner Rabbanan on the second line. Yayin mevushal va'aluntis shall ove kochavim asurim, but aluntis kibriyaso muteris. So we'll see what ingredients go into aluntis in just a moment. It's some sort of concoction, but it definitely has wine in it. And with regard to wine, Chazal say we are prohibited from drinking wine from the goyim because they may have used it for libations and idolatry. And therefore, if you receive yayin mevushal from a goy, then you have to suspect maybe that yayin was used for libations before he cooked it. Now, there's something called aluntis kibriasa, and that apparently is aluntis that was made by the Jew, and then it came into the possession of the guy, and now the Jew wants to eat from that, and that's okay, because any wine that was used in that concoction was kosher wine, because it originated from the Jew. Now, what are these concoctions? And the issue here, as we're going to see in this Ezi Aluntis in a Brisa, is the prohibition of preparing and using medical treatments on Shabbos. And it says Gabi Shabbos that osim, you're allowed to prepare enolmin. So I guess enolmin is one kind of concoction. We'll see what ingredients go into it, and that's okay. But ein osin aluntis, because aluntis is a concoction that's used in medical treatment, and that we're not allowed to use on Shabbos. Now, what are the ingredients of these respective concoctions? Ezehi anomlin, anomlin is yayin, dvash, upilpulin. So you mix up the wine, the honey, and the pepper. And that's apparently something that even healthy people would enjoy. So it's not strictly classified as uh, a medical drug, but aluntis, that's already yayin yoshan. They use old wine. They add water, mayim tzlum, clear water, and afarsimon, which is balsam oil, and that's the avdi lebe masut. That's made as a medical treatment for overheating. When the body gets overheated and you have to cool down the body, then you drink this concoction. So even if, let's say, you wanted to drink it as an if maybe it had an enjoyable flavor for you, even so, it would be a problem to prepare this because for most people it's used as medicine. Rabba Rav Yosef Diamri Chavayu Yayin Mozug Ein Bo Mishum Gilui Yayin Mevushal Ein Bo Mishum Nisuch. Now, this idea of Gilui is going to occupy our minds, especially with regard to snakes, for the balance of today's daf. And the question about Gili is what attracts the snakes? What kind of foods and mixtures and liquids and so forth would attract the snake, so that when the snake goes in to eat that mixture or whatever it might be, he would leave some sort of poisonous venom there. And if you drink it, it's very dangerous. So in the case of Yayin Mazug, which is diluted, it's heavily diluted. So there's very little wine content and it's mostly water. Let's say, for example, it has 3/4 water and 1/4 wine. So then the snake is not attracted to it, and therefore you can leave it magula, and even though it's exposed and uncovered, you're allowed to drink it. However, there's another issue with regard to mixtures that have wine in it, and that is yayin nesach. And therefore, yayin mevushal ein bo mishum nisuch. Why is that? Because the idolaters do not use cooked wines for their libations in front of their idols. You might ask another question here, and that is, well, what about the Isur Mishum Chasnus that we might intermarriage if we drink wine with them at their parties and so forth? And that should apply even to Yain Mevushal. So some say that in those days, the pasteurization or the cooking of the wine was somewhat rare, and the Chazal did not make a gzera in a milsad lo shlicha, something that's rare and non-common. Iboilu, the Gemara is a suffix now. Yain mevushal yesh bo mishum gilui o ein bo mishum gilui. In other words, until now, we've been assuming the name of Rabban Rav Yosef that yain mazug ein bo mishum gilui because it's very much watered down. But now the Gemara wants to know, what about yain mevushal? Meaning, do the snakes go into wine even if it's been cooked already? And Toshma, the Gemara wants to respond from a brisa, Heid Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi al yayin mevushal she'ein bo mishum gilui. So we have one clear record of an Amora who went as far as to say that there's no problem of gilui. The snakes do not go into these cooked wines. And Rabbi Yanai bar Yishmael Cholash, on one occasion he became weak. All Gabe, who went up to visit him, is Rabbi Shmuel ben Zerid v'Rabbanon l'Shulei Beit to find out how he's doing. They visited him, Yosvei v'Kamed Boilei, and they were sitting and asking, "What's the deal? What's the law with Yain Mevushal? Yesh bo mishum gili o ein bo mishum gili amru lahu." And Rabbi Shmuel responds to them, Hachi Omer Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish mishum gavarabba, in the name of some great man, and the Gemara identifies him as Manu Rabbi Chia. Yayin mevushal ein bo mishum gilui. Omrule, but the others who were around there, they said to Rabbi Shmuel, "Wait a minute, nismach? We're going to rely on such a report? Okay, you reported in the name of a great man, but who says we rely on this?" And Mechvele Rabbi Yani bar Yishmael Olavi al Tzavari. It's on my neck. In other words, I take responsibility that it's reliable, and there's no danger involved in drinking this pre-cooked wine. Shmuel v'Avleid haviyasve. They were sitting together. V'Aisul kamei cham ravash. They brought cooked wine in front of them, and here there were two different responses. Avliate mashche liyod. He withdrew his hands. He didn't want to go near this wine. Amalei Shmuel, but wait a second. The serpents will not leave their toxic venoms inside cooked wine because they're not interested in cooked wine. And another story is Amsei is a maidservant of Rabbi Chia Igalile Hauchamra Mevashla, right? She presented to him cooked wine, and it had not been covered, so maybe a serpent went in there. I said, "L'kami de Rabbi Chia Omer Harei Omru Yain Mevushal Ein Bo Mishum Gilui." So it's what you did was right because there's no problem of uncovered liquids. Shami de Rav Ado bar Ava, right? The servant or the Heisbacher, we call it in Yiddish, of Rav Ado, Igle Lechamra Meziga, right? There was some diluted wine that had been left uncovered. Amalahu, Hare Omru Yain Mazug, Evo Mishum Gili, there's no problem with it because it's so watered down that the serpents are not going to go in there. Omar of Papal or Omar El de Mazik Tuva. It's very, very diluted. Aval Mazik Velo Mazik. What's if it's in that middle stage? It's partially diluted, but not really fully diluted. Then Shasi. Shasi here doesn't mean that you're allowed to drink it. It means you're not allowed to drink it. So what does Shasi mean? You drink it. It means the snake would drink it. And therefore it's prohibited. Why? Because it's partially mozug, but not completely diluted. So that even though they did add a certain amount of water, but not a lot of water, so therefore the snake is still attracted. So the Gemara objects. Mozig v'lo mozig mishasi. I'm going to try to prove to you from a statement of Rabba bar Avhuna that if it's partially diluted, then the snakes are not interested. Havikasil be arba. He was on a boat. Vavi nokid chamra ba'dei. He took wine with him. Chazilahu chivya de tsarivya. See, he saw a certain snake slicing through the water, not shooting through the water, coming to drink the wine. Amalei l'shame. He turns to his Heisbach and he says to him, "Same ene didin." In other words, let's render the wine unappealing to the snake. Shakil koli maya. He took some water, shadabe, threw it into the wine. Visar lacharin. The snake recoiled. He wasn't interested in wine that was diluted with water. Achye masar nafshe. But amazige lo masar nafshe, meaning the snake realizes that when it drinks wine that's owned by a human being, he's in a sense risking his life. He's exposing himself and it might get caught. So the snake is aware of all this. So if it's the real wine that he likes and it's undiluted, then he'll be really willing to risk his life. But if it's already diluted wine, even though he didn't add that much water, but nevertheless he's not going to risk his life, and we can assume he won't go in there. So the whole sugya for today is all about the psychology of a snake. Is this really true that if it's only partially diluted, that's enough for the snake to recoil and not be willing to risk his life? For Rabbi Yani Avikah, he was in a place called Be'ach Bori, and Amri Lei, others say, Bar Hedja Hava. There was not, the story is not about Rav Yanai, but about Rav Hedja. They were sitting and drinking diluted wine. Poshle Chamra B'kuva. Right, there was some wine that was still left in the barrel. V'tzarhuni b'funkara, and they tied the barrel shut with a cloth. V'chazi al hu chivya. They saw a snake, the shakil maya, that was taking water, I guess with its mouth. V'rama b'kuva, and spitting it back into the barrel. Ad mala b'kuva, till the barrel was filled. V'solik chamra v'iloi peruka, and the wine rose over the cloth, and the snake drank it. So we see that a snake will drink even diluted wine, and even when people are around, putting its life into danger. So how do we reconcile that with what we're saying that amaziga lo masa nafshe? Amri, they answered to mozig ihu shasi, that the snake itself diluted it, right? It was the snake that took the water and spit it into the wine. But if it was diluted by someone else, then it wouldn't drink it. So what's the difference to the snake, whether the snake itself diluted the wine or somebody else diluted the wine? He says the following, that snakes do not drink diluted wine when people are present, but only in this unusual circumstance where the snake itself added the water, the snake drank the diluted wine. Whatever. In other words, if we see that snakes are drinking diluted wine, then we're not supposed to drink any wine. Therefore, we have to be machmir and prohibit wine that was uncovered, even though it's diluted. And diluted wine has the Isur of Yayin Nesach. And it means that even though the wine was diluted, the idol worshippers will nevertheless use it for libations. Why? Because it has this taste of wine. So in other words, it did not lose its identity as wine. Yayin mevushal ein bo mishum gilui, because as we said before, the snakes are not interested in wine that was already cooked. But ein bo mishum yayin esa, it doesn't even, it's not even included in the Isur yayin esa, because as we said before, it's milsel or shlichal or gazer beirab. Shami derav Chilkia bar Tuvi igla igalia hu kista demaya. right? He had a certain volume of water called a kista, and it was uncovered. Vahavi Naim Gaboy was sleeping next to it. Asal Gabeder of Chilkia Bartuvia, and he asked the question: is he allowed to use this uncovered wine? I'm sorry, uncovered water. My mistake. Amalein, he said to him, Hare Omru Emas Yoshen Aleim, that the snake is not going to move out towards this water when he sees a person next to, even a sleeping person next to the water. In other words, he's inhibited and he will not risk his life. That's only during the day. At night, that doesn't, the Gemara, this is a Havmin, the Gemara says at night this doesn't apply. Snakes are not worried about a sleeping person waking up and catching him. But reject that. Even at night. Emas Yoshen Aleim Lo Amrin. We don't accept the principle that snakes are afraid of somebody who's sleeping. Rav Lo Shosi Mi Be'arma. He would not drink water from the house of an Aramean. Omar Lo Zehi Begilui, because they leave their water uncovered and they're not careful about it. But Mi Be'arma Lo Shosi. He would drink from a Jewish widow's home. Omar, because he declared Sircha de Gavra Nikita, she follows the ways of her husband. So just like her husband, may rest in peace, had the habit of not drinking uncovered liquids, she would not leave her liquids uncovered. Shmuel Oshasi Mayami Be'ar Malos, but Shmuel had the opposite opinion. He would not drink water from the house of a widow. Omar, he declared, Lesle Mosa de Gavra. In other words, she doesn't know that you have to be so careful about covering over your liquids, your water. And there's no husband here to instill fear in her. So she doesn't bother covering the water. On the contrary, says Shmuel, just the opposite. The Armenian would be more careful about covering the water. Nehidi gluye lo kapti, amenakrusa mia kapti. In other words, they're not really so careful about leaving liquids uncovered. They shouldn't leave, but they're particular about hygiene. So what does that do for me? Even if the Armenians are not concerned about snakes and venom, and they don't cover their liquids, nevertheless, they keep them covered to prevent foreign matter from falling in. Ike Diamri, according to a different version, Rav lo shosi mayim be'arma. Rav would not drink water in the house of an Armenian. Aval mi be'arma lata shosi, he would drink from a widow's house. And Shmuel lo shosi maya, he would not drink water lomi be'arma, not from an Armenian's house nor from a widow's home. Omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Sholosh yenosem, there are three categories of wine. And what's common halachically to all these three categories is number one, ein bahem mishum gilui. We don't have to worry about covering them. The eluhain, and what are these three categories? Chad, number one, it's sharp. Number two, mar, it's bitter. Or number three, it's matok, it's sweet wine. Chad, sharp wine, is tila charifa. Okay, these are Aramaic words. The mitzare zika, which burst containers because of its strength. And it's a very, very strong wine, like 100 proof. Mara, bitter wine, that's yarnica. And masak, that's chulya. Rav Chama Masni Liluye, right? He taught them to his students that these three wines are superior wines. Chad, the sharp wine, is chamaru pilpulin, a mixture of wine and peppers. Mar, the bitter wine, is af sintun, okay, whatever that is. And masok is mei barak. So he points out on the bottom here that a green liqueur that has a bitter flavor and high alcohol content, produced from an herb by that name. And barg is a Persian word for superior. Omar Rav Shimon Lakish, Karyena ein bo mishum gilui. Okay, a certain kind of wine which is called Karyena. My Karyena, what is this wine? Omar Rabbi Abba, Chamra, this is sweet wine that comes from Asia. Amar Rava, ubimkomo yesh bo mishum gilui. But if you're in Asya, then you have to cover this wine. My time of why? Chamar Medinahu. This is the wine of the land. The snakes in the area, therefore, accustomed to it and drink from it. Omar Rava, Hai Chamar the Akrim, wine that has begun to sour and it's becoming vinegar. Atlasa Yomi, for the first 3 days, it's still not totally vinegar. Is Yesh Po Mishum Gilu Mishum Yayin Nesach. It hasn't lost its identity, and the snakes will still drink from it.